We probably have a little bit more time as we get into the summer and understand the testing we're going to go do to make that decision, whether it be Crew 12 as the next flight or Starliner. You know, we're also looking at some options for Starliner should we need to, of flying it uncrewed. The vehicle has the capability to fly uncrewed if we need to. And so we'll kind of weigh all those things as we get the testing and analysis behind us. Boeing's done a good job of developing a new thermal model, which we're using to try to understand the changes we're going to make in those dog houses. We'll add some tape and thermal barriers in different places. We have a little time to make that decision.
Okay, our next question is from Chris Davenport with The Washington Post.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for taking my question, and congrats on a successful end to the mission for Steve Stitch. You had mentioned your discussions with Boeing, and I'm just wondering, has Boeing given you a 100% commitment that they are sticking with the program, just given the enormous costs they've had to eat? And is NASA doing anything to incentivize them to stay? You just mentioned an uncrewed flight, for example. Thanks.
Yeah, Boeing, all the way up to their new CEO, Kelly, has been committed to Starliner. I can see that in the way they're approaching their solution to the problems. They're taking the time to understand the leaks we had in the helium system and testing some new seals that we may field in those flanges. The same thing with the test plans that are multifaceted for the thrusters, some testing of the Teflon material, integrated testing at White Sands. So I see them being very committed. They want to provide a transportation system with crewed capability to fulfill their missions. And then they're even, I think, stepping beyond that and thinking about low Earth orbit and COMLEO destinations with their vehicles. So I see a commitment from Boeing to continue the program. They realize that they have an important vehicle, and we were very close to having a capability that we would like to field. I think we have some changes we need to make to the way we heat those thrusters, the way we fire those thrusters, and then we can test that on the next flight. So.
Our next question is from Ken Chang with the New York Times.
Hi, thank you. This is for Joel, Steve, and Sarah. The White House put out a statement that said the landing today, representing President Trump, keeping his promise to rescue the astronauts stranded in space. And from what you just said during this news conference, I think it's been in the works for months, and a lot of work for everyone. I was just wondering, could you explicitly answer the question, if Kamala Harris were president, or if Joe Biden had run for re-election and won, would anything have changed with this mission? Thank you.
NASA is an agency. We work for the president, and who's ever there, we work for them. We had an input from that office. We took a look at it. And, our job is to take all the inputs we get and operate as successful and safely as we can. And that's what we would do for this administration, and that's what we would do for any administration.
Our next question is from Sana with Bloomberg News.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my question. I had another question regarding Boeing. I know you just mentioned that you're looking at options for an uncrewed mission. So I guess we're wondering who would pay for the uncrewed mission, and would Boeing be required to redo the crewed test flight as well? Thanks.
Yeah, what we're looking at right now is we really want what I would call is a crewed capable vehicle. So even if we were to fly the vehicle without a crew in the return back to the next steps with Starliner, we want that to be crew capable. So we want it to have all the systems in place that we could fly a crew with. In fact, as I think about it, it might be there for a contingency situation as we prepare for whatever events could happen. One of the things that I've learned in my time at NASA is always be prepared for the unexpected, always have options. And so that's what we're thinking about. So we'll take those steps forward. We'll look at the test data. We'll make a decision whether to fly it crewed or uncrewed. And then, we are trying to do it under what we call this post-certification phase of the contract. Boeing has delivered a lot of the certification data already. They have a little bit more to go relative to the prop system. I think we talked about they're flying a new spacesuit eventually, and a few other things like that. So we're looking at doing it under that phase of the contract, and NASA meeting its commitments on those flights.
Our next question is from Will Robinson-Smith with Spaceflight Now.
Hi, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us today, and congrats on the splashdown of Crew 9. Maybe just following up on Ken's question to Joel and Stitch and Sarah. Obviously, as you've discussed tonight and over the last several months, the plan has been established for some time on how to bring Butch and Sunny back to Earth, but barring them returning on the seats that were added on the Crew 8 Dragon spacecraft, had the decision been made to try to bring them back any earlier, was there a Dragon spacecraft that would have been available to operate that mission prior to the Dragon that we just saw support the launch of Crew 10? Thanks.
Yeah, the earliest Dragon that we had to go fly the mission really was this Capsule 210. And so when we were planning originally on Crew 10 to have the newer spacecraft, we thought it would be ready. And initially, we were going to launch in mid-February. We moved it to March 25th. And then I think Sarah talked briefly before about some of the challenges we had, or maybe it was Mr. Gerstenmaier, with a battery system that was a bad component we had to pull off. We had to pull the heat shield off and vector out of some work on the vehicle. We had some challenges with some valves in the prop system. And this, to me, is just evidence of how complicated. I don't think we always do a super good job of explaining how complicated the spacecraft itself is made up of millions of components that have to work in an integrated fashion, and you go through testing and qualification to get there. And so those components didn't work. And when we looked at that, we just pivoted over to the vehicle that was going to be ready the soonest, which was Capsule 210, and that led us to the March 12th date and then eventually the March 15th launch.
Our next.
Yeah, and maybe I would just add that with 5 Crew Dragon spacecraft in the fleet, certainly many paths are possible, right? With the allocations as we had them with our current slate of missions in the next 12 to 18 months, exactly as Steve said, it was the new spacecraft that was anticipated to be ready first, with the one we ended up flying shortly on the heels, and then when we ran into a processing issue on that new vehicle, the other one could be ready sooner, and so those were the 2 that were coming available. But certainly we can pivot and adapt. Flexibility is the name of the game, right? And so if we change what lanes or what stage of the flow any given spacecraft is in, we can open up other options available. But we had these vehicles allotted to or allocated to specific missions, and these were the 2 spacecraft that met the need that we had here in the spring to fly these missions in the timeframes that they were requested.
All right, our next question is from Joey Roulette.
Hey, thanks. Just 2 questions. One quick one for Steve. I just want to be clear. So it sounds like the testing results that you guys are going to have with Starliner this summer and maybe later on is going to determine whether its next mission is uncrewed or crewed. And whatever that next crewed mission is that going to be like a routine certification crew mission, or might there be another CFT? And then the second question is for Bill Specht. I was just wondering if there's any studies that Butch and Sunny are involved in that investigates the like behavioral or psychological kind of response to not just long duration spaceflight, but unexpected changes to a mission in the middle of it. Thanks.
Yeah, when we look back at the crewed flight test, we got a lot of good data out of that flight relative to having a crew on board. So really the thing that we need to solidify and go test is the prop system and the service module. We need to make sure we can eliminate the helium leaks, eliminate the service module thruster issues that we had on docking, and then the rest of the vehicle performed really well. So when we look forward, what we'd like to do is that one flight and then get into a crew rotation flight. So the next flight up would really test all the changes we're making. to the vehicle. And then the next flight beyond that, we really need to get Boeing into a crewed rotation. So that's kind of the strategy.
Yeah, and then to your second question, all of our crew members go through evaluations. They fill out surveys. They do medical evals. So all of these things happen on every crew member. So we do get some unique data from Butch and Sunny based on their stay, but it's something that we do with every crew member that flies. There's always changes that happen on board. There's always adjustments that we have to make that all of the crew members adapt to. As you've watched with our flight schedule over the years, it's very rare that we actually get a flight to fly exactly where we planned it 2 years out when they were thinking it was going to be. So it's okay that we have these changes and they adapt really well. But everybody gets kind of looked at in terms of those effects and understanding just the effects of spaceflight on them. So.
Okay, our next question is from Maria with KBIR Knoxville.
Hi, yes, thank you so much for your time. If someone can walk me through the physical and mental adjustments that the astronauts are going to be experiencing.
I can try and see if Bill and Joel have anything to add. When they get back, the body is an amazingly adaptable. The one thing that the body will struggle a bit with is the inner ear and the vestibular response in microgravity. When you transition from 1G here that we're sitting in this room to then in space, the inner ear can get a little disturbed because gravity's not pulling the fluid down and the little hairs inside the inner ear. And so the crew can take a little while to adapt to microgravity. That same thing happens in reverse when you land back on Earth. The human body was adaptable and was used to being in microgravity. Now, the vestibular response is such that you feel disoriented, you may feel a little dizzy, you may have trouble getting up. And then, of course, physically, their body, when they were operating in space and doing operations inside the various modules, their muscles weren't working as hard, their heart wasn't working as hard, and so there's a muscular and cardiovascular kind of reconditioning that has to happen. And so that's what's happening now. And then, there's a little bit of response coming back to 1G. In space, I could release this pin, and it's going to stay right where it is. And, in 1G, if I release the pin, it falls. And so there's a little bit of that the crew has to get back and learn the skills back here on Earth again. So.
Okay, our next question is from Jackie with the Times of London.
Hello, and thank you. I'm sorry if this is a really frustrating question because I know there's so much good work done on this mission, but there has been a fictitious narrative woven around it by prominent people who are hard to ignore. Why has NASA not pushed back more emphatically against that and against the use of astronauts by one of its commercial contractors as political pawns? And what's to be lost by simply correcting that narrative for the sake of the public who have paid for the mission? Thank you.
I would say, our job at NASA is to successfully and safely fly these missions. We fly it with the laws of physics, and we fly it with our commercial partners. And so oftentimes there may be things out in the press that may not be exactly what's happening. And our job is to fly these missions, and regardless of what you read in the press, our job is to fly successful missions, safe missions, and do the science we do on board the International Space Station. I mentioned this year 25 years of continuous crew presence on board later this year, the International Space Station. And we do about 150 experiments every expedition we fly. So think about it, every 6 months. I think we're over 3,000 experiments since we started the International Space Station, and that's what we focus on.
Okay, our next question is from Jeff Faust with Space News.
Hey, good evening. Question for Bill or Steve. Since the Crew 9, Crew 10 handover lasted only a couple of days, was there anything you would normally do on a handover you weren't able to do in this case? And in the future, might you consider shorter handovers between future commercial crew missions? Thanks.
Yeah, across the board, the main thing that we have to get done is, like anytime you get to a new place, is the emergency briefings. Where do I go in case of an emergency? What are my duties in terms of an emergency? And that happens very early on. And then the follow-ons are more of the general, hey, where did you guys put this thing? Or where did you put that? Where did you leave this wrench when you get up there? Because you can imagine the size of the space stations is so large, and there's a lot of stuff up there. So a lot of the handover that we do with the crews is more set up to be an efficiency gain. And that really helps them be more effective when they go and get to the tasks done that we need to. So when we reduce that time, we reduce that efficiency in the near term to accomplish the tasks on board. We evaluate that each time and understand what our handover is. In general, we don't look to reduce that because we want to be as efficient as possible. We want to get everything done in the most efficient manner, get the most things done on space station that we can. But in this case, it was actually to our advantage to go work that shorter handover and then get them home as quicker, hitting this weather day that we had here today, and not leave it up to how the weather was going to behave days and days from now. So the critical stuff always gets done, that emergency handover, that how do we go handle contingencies on board. They're trained on the ground for all of these things, and we have a lot of support for the teams on the ground to help them as they go, so we can shorten it if we want to, but it's not quite the same as getting up there and finding out from the person that's been up there for 6 months, hey, I found that this was the best spot to put this, or I left this here, and so when you need it, go look over there to go do this, or this is the best way to go pull out this drawer, or whatever you have to do for your experiments on board. So nothing beats that face-to-face handover and the time they get up there, but we have the options to shorten it when it makes the most sense.
Okay, our next question is from Sawyer with NASAspaceflight.com.
Thank you so much. This question is, I believe, for Sarah. With this being the final splashdown on the east coast of the United States, what is the plan for Megan? Is that going to be repurposed to the west coast? Is that going to stay on the east coast? And then what becomes the contingency if, for example, the weather isn't good at the planned Pacific landing sites, whereas here you had the Gulf and the Atlantic?
Hey, we don't know the answer yet to what will happen, what will become of Megan. We've got Shannon here on the West Coast. I'm sitting here in California right now, and there's unique benefits and unique challenges of weather patterns on the West Coast versus the East Coast. Just one example, we have far more stable weather in terms of wind and wind speed, wave height than we did in Florida. So where we needed numerous sites on both coasts of Florida to provide geographic diversity to avoid weather patterns that may be happening in one area and not another, not so much the case on the West Coast. However, our cloud cover is different here than in Florida. And so things like the airborne assets that support our mission might have different challenges out here than over there. So we've done a lot of trying to learn from meteorologists and historical weather patterns, and then figure out the right number of sites and the right number of support assets to ensure that we maintain a high return availability, which means a high percentage of days that would be a viable return option with a safe splashdown, regardless of what coast we're splashing down on.
All right, our next question is from Isam with AFP. If you're talking, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry about that. I was on mute. A couple of quick questions. Steve, you mentioned that they'd be released to their families in a day or two, but they're still going to be going through with rehabilitation for quite a while, right? If you could discuss that. And the second question is just a bit broader to follow on from some of my colleagues. As Steve confirmed that, Crew 10 was the designated mission that this could happen, could you help us sort of square that circle that, with praising the administration for accelerating the timeline? How concretely, just to follow up on my colleagues' questions, how concretely can the administration be credited with accelerating the recovery when, the plan hasn't fundamentally changed here? It's just something that we're having a little bit of trouble understanding. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll talk the rehabilitation and then let Joel talk about the other questions. Rehabilitation will continue. There's a sequence of exercises that they do to try to regain their physical strength over a number of weeks. It's a pretty standard protocol that they go through post-landing to recover. It's well documented, well practiced, and the docs and the trainers that do this work will kind of follow each crew member, whether it be Butch and Sonny or the others. We talk about Butch and Sonny because they had a 9-month stay, but the others had 171-day stay or so, which is pretty typical of what we've had. And I'll let Joel handle the other questions.
And so you were asking the input from the administration. So I think Ken Bowersox said it well the other day. It excited the system, right? It gave us some energy in the system. But the other input was to do this successfully and safely. And that's why I talked about all the different inputs that you get. We got the input from the White House, but you also have to look at the vehicle readiness. We talked about looking at weather. We talked about the recovery team, handover, the vehicle traffic going to and from the International Space Station. So when you put all that together, we came up with, I thought, a pretty good plan that the teams executed over the last 4 or 5 days.
All right, we'll take the next question here in the room.
Darlene Ferris with Fox 26 Houston. I was just wondering if any of the experiments or tasks, was there anything that was able to be done due to the unexpected extra manpower with them on board that wouldn't have like a benefit to having the extra people?
So we, once Crew 9 arrived and Crew 8 departed, we were at our normal crew level. So we managed within the normal kind of cadence that we did there. But before that, we absolutely took advantage of Butch and Sonny being there and having the extra hands. We had some maintenance activities that had to be done over the summer that would have potentially taken away from some of the science that we were doing that we didn't have to take away from that time because of the fact that we had the extra hands there. So it was great having them there over the summer as extra hands to help out with a number of activities going on.
Okay, we'll take our next question here in the room.
This may be premature, but initial reports from the recovery ship just about their condition and how they're doing, has anybody heard?
I haven't heard anything specifically from the recovery team, but just in looking at the way as they came out of Dragon, they all looked very healthy. You could tell they all looked like they were feeling about normal for the landing and recovery phase where their body's trying to readapt. So, yeah, I haven't heard any reports of anything other than that they're doing well. So
I saw a lot of smiling and waving.
Yes, yes.
Okay, our next question is from Ellen with thedailymail.com.
Hi, thank you guys so much for taking our questions tonight. This question is for Joel. Barry Wilmore's daughter spoke out on social media and blamed politics and negligence for her dad's delayed return. We know that President Trump and Elon Musk both said the previous administration didn't want to bring the Starliner crew back for political reasons. Can you comment on these claims?
Yeah, so I wasn't involved in any conversations with the previous administration. It was clear we have a request from the current administration, and the results you saw is what we saw today with the landing of Crew 9.
Okay, we'll take our next question here in the room.
Have you guys gotten a chance to talk with the families of Butch and Sonny? And I mean, I'm sure just being able to see them wave and smile today is a huge relief for them, but they've been in quarantine and up in space for almost a year. How are they feeling with everything?
Yeah, I haven't talked personally to the families, but I know the astronauts have a great support system. In other words, they're able to effectively FaceTime with their family and keep in touch with their family. I'm sure Butch is looking forward and Sonny both coming. Easter's coming up and there's graduations coming up and there's lots of family activities coming up that the timing's probably pretty good for. So I haven't had a chance to talk to the family, so.
My guess they had bigger smiles than the crew members.
Yes, yes.
Okay, our next question is from Mike with space.com.
Thank you, guys. This is probably for Sarah. I was just wondering, were there any different approaches that you guys took with this Dragon to kind of meet this faster deadline, or this, and if there were any kind of changes to the processing, are those things you can take into future missions?
Hey, no changes to the processing. And actually, if you're able to go back and listen to Friday night's briefing, I think Steve also shared a little more detail about that. But similar process, it's just a matter of doing a little bit of Tetris within our facilities of what vehicles are going into what tests or what operations in the pre-launch processing flow first. So we certainly did that. There's a few items of hardware within the vehicle that are unique to the specific crew flying. For example, we have small, medium, and large seat buckets installed in each of the 4 locations, and then custom foam for each individual to further customize their experience. And so there was a little bit of just doing the tally on the unique hardware and making sure it was all okay to be used for this mission, but nothing unique to the actual processing flow itself.
Okay, our next question is from Carolyn with Fortune Magazine.
Thank you very much, and congratulations. I'm wondering, can you just share a little more how Sunny and Butch handled kind of the switch mentally to the 9-month mission, besides being very resilient, and what advice you give the rest of us lonely humans when we encounter challenging circumstances? And then maybe just talk a little more about the physical repercussions with respect to radiation, effects on the heart and cardiac, that kind of thing, and how we go about planning to protect against that when we think about missions like to Mars and extended stays. Thanks.
I can start, and then the other guys could ask. Before an astronaut flies, we talk to the crew. The crew members are talked to about extending. Hey, you may be assigned for a 6-month mission or an 8-day mission in this case, and you may be extended. Frank Rubio was an example, right? Mark Vande Hei was an example. So this isn't the first time that people are flown. Clearly, their mission was much shorter than those other missions, but the crew members are talked about, hey, what would you do if you had to be up there for a year? So they mentally prepare before they launch, and they talk to the other crew members that have flown for these long-duration missions. And so the teams are preparing. We do different things on the ground. If you're there a little longer than normal, maybe you'll have some extra family conference times, or maybe a half day off after a certain amount of time on orbit. And so we had experience from past crew members, and we made changes in the operations and how we do that. And so let's see, Bill, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think the other question was, really on kind of the effects of space on people in general, and when you change the duration on them. We look at every crew member when they're going up and making sure that we feel confident, even if their mission had to be extended, that they're up for it and that they've got, I think, the time allowable, I think, for them to stay in space and to go through that. We monitor everything on board. We keep an eye on things like radiation. We keep an eye on things like solar activity that can affect that. We keep an eye on the rest of the environmental factors on board, whether it be the carbon dioxide levels, the CO2 levels, the contaminants that we have on board. We have scrubbers and filters and things that take that out. So we do all the things that we would normally do to manage that for crew and minimize their exposure to anything that could be considered harmful. And then we limit the times to the best of our ability that we can up there.
Our next question is from Marcia Smith with spacepolicyonline.com.
Thanks so much. Steve, you mentioned that Crew 11 might launch as early as July, which seems like a pretty short interval for Crew 10 to be up there. Could you talk about what's driving you to launch as early as July? And will either of the astronauts who are bumped from Crew 9 be on Crew 11, Stephanie Wilson or Zena Cardman? And which capsule will they be flying?
Let's see the timing for that mission right now. Originally we were going to fly that mission. We had been if you look at historically, our rotations have been in February and August. There is a particular SpaceX cargo flight, CRS-33, that has the ability to do some reboost for the space station, and that needs to fly in that late August, early September timeframe. And so we moved our handover up. That boost trunk is what we call it, will be there for a large part of the fall timeframe. So to get all the propellant used on that mission. So that's why we looked at moving it up. Right now, we think we'll fly probably the Capsule 206, which is our fleet leader. It'll be on its 6th flight. We'll continue to work that with SpaceX. You have to remember with space station, one of the critical consumables is docking ports. We have 2 of those docking ports. And so once we fly that CRS-33 mission with the boost trunk, one of those docking ports will be tied up for an extended duration. And we like to do this direct handover. We like to ensure the new vehicle is there, the new crew's there, before we undock the astronauts that have been there for the increment in progress. And so when you put all that together, it drove us to look at right now, mid to late July. Of course, things can change over time, but that's kind of what we're looking at. We'll kind of pivot over to that once we complete the debriefs for Crew 10. So,
our next question is from Will Robinson-Smith with Spaceflight Now.
Hi. Taking a question from us. Question to Steve Fitch. Going back to the comment you made earlier in this briefing, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said that there was another look that needed to be taken at the flight suit for those flying both these flyers. Can you add a little bit of detail into that may need to be changed and the reason for that? Thanks.
Did you get that?
I couldn't.
I'm sorry, you're coming in a little bit, it's breaking up a little bit. Can you please try to repeat your question? Operator, if you could please unmute the participant. Will, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, perfect.
Nope.
I'm sorry, we keep losing you. If you could just follow up with us after this news conference, we'll be happy to get a response over to you from the panel up here. But for now, that'll do it for our press conference this evening. Once again, Crew 9 is safely back on Earth. And as always, you can follow NASA and all of our missions on nasa.gov. Thanks for joining. We'll see you next time.